I'll start at the very top. Under the Lisbon Treaty, we have given ourselves some new tools. And at the very top is the new tool of the President of the European Council as a semi-permanent post. A post occupied by a prominent European politician for a period of 2.5 years, renewable once. The current and the first member of this new post, first holder of this new post rather, is the former Belgian Prime Minister Herman van Rompuy. This should give slightly greater strategic coherence to the direction of European policy. At the level of foreign policy, pure foreign policy, the common foreign and security policy as we call it, there we have the new post of the High Representative for Foreign Policy, whereby 3 old posts are brought together and merged into one, or 3 old functions are merged into one. Confusingly, we use the same label, High Representative for Foreign Policy, for the first of them. But Cathy Ashton, Baroness Catherine Ashton, is the first High Representative for Foreign Policy of the European Union under the Lisbon Treaty. When she sits across the table at ministerial level, meeting the Foreign Minister of country X and Y, meeting Foreign Minister McCully, for example, she sits across the table from the Foreign Minister, and in the past, that Foreign Minister would have been sitting across the table from not 1, not 2, but 3 politicians. He would have been sitting across the table from Dr. Javier Solana as the, if you like, the old High Representative for Foreign Policy. He would have been sitting across the table from the European Commissioner for External Relations, Benita Ferrero-Waldner, or before her, Chris Patten, who's well known and familiar to you here. And he would have been sitting across from the Foreign Minister of the country holding the rotating presidency of the European Union. So those 3 roles have been merged into one in the post of the new High Representative, who is also a Vice President of the European Commission. The High Representative prepares the agenda and chairs the Foreign Affairs Council in Brussels. In this role, she replaces as chairman the previously the Foreign Minister of the country holding the rotating presidency and changing every 6 months. She is assisted in this by the new service called the External Action Service, the European External Action Service. EU delegations around the world represent the Union and have as their political and administrative boss Baroness Ashton. So just as she in that new post took over roles which in the past had been done by others, the European Commission or the rotating presidency, the same can be said for the EU delegations. On the 1st of December 2009, I changed jobs. I used to be the head of delegation of the European Commission to New Zealand, and I became magically the head of delegation of the European Union to New Zealand. when I was the head of delegation of the European Commission, by definition, I could only exercise those functions which pertained to the European Commission as laid down in the various treaties, the constitutional construction of the European Union. Equally, as the head of the EU delegation, I can only exercise those functions that are laid down as part of the functions of the European Union. But the difference is large, because just as at her level, the level of foreign ministers, the Baroness Ashton was replacing, among other people, Patten and the Presidency foreign minister. This system of chairmanship of EU groups around the world and of representing the European Union vis-à-vis foreign governments, this is replicated in cities like Canberra and in Wellington. So, as the head of the EU delegation, I have taken over also the responsibilities of the rotating presidency, just as Cathy Ashton has done at her level. Now, at that point, I don't want to draw the link too strongly, in case anyone gets the impression that my role in Canberra equates with Cathy Ashton's role in Brussels. There is a difference of at least stress level, which is marked. But nonetheless, what it does mean is that whereas in the past the ambassador from the country holding the presidency, the rotating 6-month presidency, would be the ambassador to prepare our internal coordination groups and chair those meetings. Today that responsibility falls on me as the EU head of delegation. Whereas in the past, when we had an official presentation of EU position on something to be made to the let's say the Australian government, and I'll come back to this point in a second, the Australian government in Canberra, we would do it in what was called the Troika format. You would have taking the last examples, the before Lisbon, you would have had the Swedish ambassador, you would have had the ambassador of Spain representing the next presidency, and you would have had me as the European Commission head of delegation, going in what's called the Troika format to present formally a position to the Australian government. Today that's done by me as the EU head of delegation, representing the totality of the Union. Now there are 2 footnotes that I would want to signal. The first is to say that I exercise this role in a very transparent manner and well coordinated manner with my EU colleagues. We spend a lot of time in coordination meetings, and where I am invited or instructed rather to present a formal démarche to the authorities, these instructions and the background material we share and we discuss depending on the complexity of the issue, and I will report back to all of the EU ambassadors how it went and so on. But it has become a role for the EU delegation that has taken over the responsibility also of the presidency. And so what we do on the ground, in principle, is reflecting what happens in Brussels at the higher level by Cathy Ashton. Now the second footnote that I want to put in there is that for various reasons we still apply the old system for the moment in a number of countries around the world. The general principle is as I have described it and as we apply it in Canberra. But the old system still applies in certain places for various reasons. And one of those examples, in fact, is Wellington. I am the EU ambassador and head of delegation to New Zealand. But I live in Canberra. I have my deputy, George Cunningham, charge d'affaires, heading the EU delegation, or in daily practice, heading the EU delegation in Wellington. But I am the ambassador. In these cases, we have decided to keep the old system in place temporarily until we upgrade these delegations. We call these delegations regionalised delegations because they exist, they have generally a small number of staff heading them up, but the ambassador is somewhere else in the region. So these regionalised delegations will get upgraded, and when that happens, and when we have the ambassador of the EU to New Zealand residing in Wellington, then we would transfer the presidency responsibilities also to him or her. So that's the second footnote.